Hello, CH is true, and I've been thinking a lot about questions of knowledge, wisdom, what constitutes true wisdom. This, of course, is the latest direction of my channel, and it's the one that, for as long as this channel lasts, and I don't know how long that's going to be, I'm going to stick with it because it's a singularly important subject. To the ancient Greeks, geometry was a system of wisdom. Now, this is where modern and ancient notions of mathematics clash. Because if you go to Seneca, here he is, he was a Stoic, he was very skeptical of geometry as a liberal art. But one has to remember that Seneca was looking at it from a Roman perspective. And the Romans would approach systems of mathematics and science from a very pragmatic and practical standpoint. So for Seneca, what he was criticizing, in my opinion, or my interpretation, was the pragmatic, the overemphasis on pragmatism, the overemphasis on how to make a buck, because geometry was about how to calculate how much area you owned versus that of your neighbor, so forth, yada yada. But that was not the way it was to the Greeks. For the Greeks, geometry was peering into wisdom itself, and their understanding of what geometry was, you were looking at the realm of forms. Now, we don't have that concept today, certainly not since Einstein. The idea of a Euclidean geometry being perfectly true. However, I would still maintain that that system of thought, that ability to start with an axiom and arrive at a conclusion, is the development of mental discipline. It is the development of wisdom. It is the development of, it's not wisdom in itself, but of all the branches of mathematics, it is the one closest to philosophy. Algebra, no. Calculus, that gets into physics and the rest of it, but geometry is where one develops the skill to think not only mathematically and spatially, but also philosophically, if then. If I begin with this, I construct this argument. I taught geometry. Would you believe that? You probably don't. You probably don't believe I've ever taught any system of mathematics or science or anything like that. I don't blame you. I can barely believe it myself. It's another part of my life now, and I may go back to it, I may move on from it. But there are some lessons that I learned from my time, and I want to focus on geometry because of all of my experiences, the teaching of geometry was in a lot of ways the most illuminating and interesting as seeing the development of young minds. I taught this generation of young people logical thinking. I probably deserve a round of applause for that, but it's true, I did. And as I've observed young people, I've observed many fine things. I've observed curiosity, a zest for knowledge, an ability to figure things out. I taught gifted young people, so I was able to access the creativity of their minds. However, I also have to look at this generation and compare them to, and I'm not comparing them literally to the generation that Seneca would have known, because the actual generation that Seneca would have known cannot be glorified. But what I would compare are the images that they have in society as to how to model themselves versus the images that the ancient Romans had. Images were not reality. In no way were the ancient Romans all a bunch of Stoics who were fearless in battle. That is not the actual case. But that was their ideal. That was the idea that one had to live by. It was not Justin Bieber. It was not One Direction. And I have nothing against any of those people. I don't know them. But they are a certain kind of image that our culture has projected, versus the time of the Greeks and Romans where it was another image that was projected. Now, the Greeks and Romans were not kind people. They were not my idea of heroes. In addition, the Greek philosophers, the Pythagoreans, the geometers, the Euclideans, were oftentimes very elitist. They had a very low opinion of women. They had a very low opinion of slaves. They had a very low opinion of people without land. They were not my idea of what men should be. But they understood how to be men, and they understood how to be women. They may not have been kind, men and women, but they understood that being a man and being a woman is an art. And for them, logic, the liberal arts, and the sciences, at their highest understanding, were not just investigations of the external world. They were investigations of how to be a human being. And the human being for the ancients, by the way, it's a very complex subject, but a human being was seen as a kind of archetype of the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. Again, it goes very, very deep, and it's beyond the scope of this video. And by the way, not all schools of philosophy agreed on that, but there was a general sense in which they viewed the development of character as something of paramount importance. Something that today's young people, with all due respect, need a little help with. I have to be honest. I can only go with what I've seen. So I'm reflecting back on my time as an educator, and it's another time in my life. I may go back to it, I may not. But I believe that a system of philosophy, first of all, let me backtrack, a system of mathematics is also a system of philosophy. That is not emphasized in the school system. It should be. Our public schools of today fragment things. They create different fields of specialized knowledge. Now I understand there's a movement to get away from that and to have a more integrative approach. But still, it's different fragmented systems of knowledge. Geometry does not fit easily within that. Kids will often wonder, justly and rightly, why am I learning this? It isn't useful for science. It isn't useful for anything. It's just a year of mathematics, and why am I learning? The answer for me is that you're learning it as much as a philosophy and as a liberal art in the ancient understanding of what liberal arts meant, which was somewhat different than our current understanding of what it means. But the ancient understanding of liberal art was of the development of the character, the development of, dare I say it, the soul, the development of morality in the human being. That the ability to discipline oneself mentally is also the ability to discipline oneself spiritually. It is a form of meditation. And with the ability to think clearly, one also has the ability to act morally, to rise above one's impulses and inclinations. And Seneca, although he wasn't very happy with the geometers, he did, as a Stoic, understand the necessity of inculcating that as a virtue. Even his rivals, the Epicureans, really did understand that. They were often accused of being hedonists and pleasure mongers, but they weren't. The actual Epicureans were not. They too understood the need for virtue, and moderation, by the way. Our society today that young people see, and I can't blame them because they're mirroring what they see in society, it is not Epicurean. If anything, it's something very, very different. It's something that doesn't have a philosophy. It doesn't have enough of a central focus. We call it democracy, but in actual reality, it's more of a kind of relativism, a moral relativism. I would hope that geometry as a liberal art and as a liberal science would be a kind of way back to the fundamentals. But it only is if the teacher remembers to teach it as such. And hopefully I succeeded in doing so.